You are listening to the Push Media Podcast Network.
This is good shit.
God save the Queen. A fascist regime. They'll make you a moron. If I may just start out with quoting the Sex Pistols, if I may begin this entry into the record of human history that will hopefully be found by some group of aliens or some space that's floating around on an asteroid that from a distance just looks like a big oblong rock, except for one crazy person here on Earth claiming, no, guys, I really think that's we're getting too far ahead of ourselves before I give you a taste of everything up top, because that's how I like to do it. As I go, you'll find out. As more of you listen, thank you for listening. Numbers grow each week. Shout out 600-pound Hitler. I mean, if we're good for anything here at the program, it's complete oxymoronic, serious facts that you should know that are made up but are true, and it's goddamn fantastic titles. If there's anything we do here, it's I make mom jokes about a relationship I long for with your mother that I used to actually have in reality, but her love grew cold, and killer fucking titles, and tremendous YouTube thumbnails that no one seems to appreciate because YouTube has to be shadow banning me. It makes no fucking sense, the numbers. So, as I keep going, these will get more apt, more in tune, more in sync with the formula here. I like to give you a little bit up top, which is something I should have thought of ahead of time before I lost that aforementioned relationship with your mama. So, God save the Queen, fascist regime. 96-year-old, sweet, adorable, proper, and prim little lady who loves her grandchildren, and even tolerates the one guy in somehow relationship to the throne still that managed to grope a princess during her funeral. She seemed to even put up with his bullshit while she was still alive. While she still managed to stay alive up until there was a new prime minister of Britain. You know that's why that lady made it. You know she hung on. You know there were many, many fucking times over the last few years where she was probably like, boy, you know what, if this is the last cup of tea, cheers. And you know, British people, if any of you are lucky enough, and I'm actually being serious, if any of you are lucky enough, fancied enough, if you will, to actually have a few British people in your life, you understand that they really don't fuck around with the word cheers. They love that shit. It's at the end of emails. It's apparently what they do when they drink their last hypothetical cup of tea. Point of what I'm saying is, that lady had plenty of reasons to check out over the last 2 years because she had to deal with Prince Andrew and his bullshit and his, numerous visits to the island in the Atlantic where, I don't want to keep repeating it, but it is a fact that bears stating. That was probably a tad bit embarrassing for the crown. She probably didn't really want to get up and keep being 95 and finding out what the fuck did he do now? But she had a duty. She had a duty to England. To make it, to ensure the transition of a prime minister. To ensure the transition of a prime minister who, for most fault of his own, Boris Johnson, that is, did everything he could to look like a British version of Trump, which did not help him or his image or his accomplishments, because by doing that, to Americans, he just looked like a British Trump, and we see everything through the lens of this is the American version of that. Can you blame us because that, look around at the products in the world? Except for the Fast and Furious movies. At this point, I think the last two sequels are exclusively in Cantonese. Watched on Coyle, I knew. I couldn't help it. But Boris did himself no favors looking like a British Trump because that just made all Americans on average just think, he's doing Trump shit over there, only with slightly different hair and probably dressed a tad bit better. But in reality, Boris wasn't all that bad. He did have to step down because he had a party during a time of very strict and recently enforced, he was the guy to enforce them, COVID restrictions, which is wrong, which is not good, which is not something you should tolerate, which is not something you should allow the governor of California to do while he then probably, very much likely, begins a presidential campaign despite having an incumbent cadaver. But Boris did have to step down because the British people have a respect for rules. Something admirable. It is what truly and fundamentally makes them British, and what truly and fundamentally makes us American is the fact we look at your rules and say, you stupid idiot, we're just going to steal or do whatever we want. We're going to see what happens. This is America. There is, in some weird, beautifully chaotic, hopefully not violent way, I lean towards that. It's fun. It seems much more exciting. But that is probably just in line with the fact we are a country with very little history, in all honesty. When we're talking about Europe, we're talking about thousands of years of doing shit. They kind of, and if we are to be logical and appeal to the nature of just basic, wow, I just gave myself a Mike Tyson lisp. If we are to just appeal to basic math, logically it makes sense that those have been alive longer culturally. The longer they've been doing it, probably have perfected or gotten close to what is the best way of doing it. That's just logical. So the British people and the respect for rules, as much as I want to be American and steal their shit when they're too busy following the rules, there's something admirable about it. And I say all that to say, the Queen of England was not in any way, as a 96-year-old woman who was rather stylish, I'm dare I say. Hopefully that's not inflammatory, because I know mom jokes don't fly in the UK, so I gotta figure out something to insinuate I'm tapping a woman who has a maternal feeling to you in your life. Point of what I'm getting at here. The Queen of England was not a fascist colonizing anything. And everyone on Twitter who is saying otherwise is full of shit. Now, I don't blame you. On one hand, you're being American, and God bless you. There should be, on some level, some part of you that says, you know what? Fuck anyone who calls themselves a king or a queen. That's silly. Because you know what? You are right. But, unfortunately, like many true things, like many real, powerful truths, it is something that if you are not intelligent enough and you arrive at too soon, you eventually also arrive in one of the Carolinas with a tiki torch. If you get what I'm saying. There are just some things that you gotta say, that's interesting, and then keep your fucking mouth shut. So, don't be on Twitter insulting people who actually gave a shit that this woman who represented something to them passed away. That this elderly woman, who was at the very least a public figure, her silly metal crown notwithstanding, she represented something to a lot of people who are a part of a culture that have been doing it a very long time. Maybe have, I don't know, some reverence. Now, is this a hot take? Is this fun to say? Is it cool? Is it really radical for me to be like, hey man, really like genuflect, appreciate people who follow the rules, have respect for your... You know what? Part of me thinks yes. Part of me genuinely thinks one of the last ways truly left in our society to actually rebel, to actually be someone to have like an opinion that's going to get people pissed off, is to actually say something like, maybe we should be a little more selective as to who goes into what bathroom. That was good, I thought. Okay, the Queen of England was not some crook. She was also not some Kunta Kinte who pulled up in India with a knife telling all the villagers, this is mine now. That's also not what happened. She wasn't a colonizer. She was a woman who had tea at a specific time every day and met with world leaders around the world and somehow managed to symbolically connect with everyone in a country to feel as if she was some symbolic grandmother, to the point where people who never met the woman are mourning still. That is an impactful person, and I can also tell you, I'm just guessing here, I don't think she personally killed Mahatma Gandhi. I almost fell into an Indian accent with just the first part of his name. That's not where you would expect that to pop up. Couldn't resist that again, but I continue. This lady was not a vicious colonizer. She was not someone who deserved to get hated on Twitter by people who were never and never have been, or parents or grandparents or children will ever step foot in that country on so much as a semester abroad. There was some rugby player in Australia, so thank God the world stopped so we could hear her opinion. A female Australian rugby player caught a bit of heat when she said, "The Queen is a dog. Who cares that she's dead?" And then she deleted the Instagram post, which meant she had a picture attached to that thought. Because Instagram is Twitter for people who can't read. What is that for? And even, all right, let's just walk that out. Let's just think about, let's maybe hypothetically assume everything has gone wrong with the world, and you're right. Let's walk out the idea that the Queen is some colonizing, violent white nationalist proprietor of manifest destiny. Sure, the British have established most of the world. Now, I'll grant you that point. Allow me to follow up with a second question. Do you like it? How's it treating you? Do you have a house? Do you have a car? Do you have a family? Are you not worried where your meal's coming from next? If you're one of the people who say yes to that question, and if you're listening to this podcast, you have a phone, so you have no choice, so I think case closed, judge. What do you really have to fucking complain about? I get you have some level of white guilt that you think gets you some type of points that you can redeem for a prize later on if you share an opinion socially that makes you look tolerably disgusted with yourself for being whatever you are. And whatever you are is now fluid, so why don't you just identify as someone who has a little bit of manners, you fuck? Point Colin. Anyway. She wasn't any of those things. And now, what she was, and I state this with the utmost respect, I state this, and you must forgive me if it's perceived wrong across the pond, because according to Spotify, that's right, they tell you everything. Don't listen on that platform. According to Spotify, we got about 15% of the audience is over in England. I don't know really how that happened, but, cheers. Your mama's fat. See, I'm a diplomat. But the Queen of England, right, what she really is, in my opinion, and what I plan on backing up with some facts for those ignorant, and those British, forgive me for using my American perspective, the Queen of England, who lived to be 96, who lived literally, I truly think, to just make sure she oversees the transfer of power from one prime minister to the next, because boy, did America drop the ball on that the last time. That woman was a gangster. A gangster. A real G. I'm talking the likes of which rival Iceberg Slim and recently Jason Sudeikis. That level of chili pimp. The Queen of England, a lot of people think there's this misconception, and I think a lot of it is the genius of the crown. Maybe that's why they're smart enough to be the family in charge. Pay no attention to the amount of space or the lack thereof missing between all of the royal family members' eyes. Anyway, part of the reason I think the genius of the crown and why they've managed to, quietly survive the age of the 21st century, where there is social media, where there are people who have cameras everywhere, where there is no longer a chance for your dumb, retarded, perverted, pedophile prince cousin nephew to just fuck off, as they say popularly over in England, to just fuck off over to the island in the Atlantic where the guy named Jeff was the president or prime minister, if you will, of Kid Fuck Mathematics Island. In the 21st century, that is much harder to get away with. It's also much harder, I would imagine, in the 21st century to get away with convincing a lot of people you are in charge, you are a king and a queen and a duke and a duchess and a prince and a princess, because this isn't Aragon. I refuse to use a low-hanging fruit Game of Thrones reference because I've never seen the series. And I will tell you this. Game of Thrones is actually based on the formation of what came to be the British Empire. Isn't that actually fascinating? Even though I don't fuck with dragons and I don't fuck with medieval shit. I don't like fantasy stuff that much. I know, I might be a buzzkill. Sue me, I like movies and TV shows where people have jobs. So again, I say shout out Aragon for no fucking reason at all, because that's what I do. Anyway, and you know what? Actually, one more thing about Game of Thrones. I don't fuck with Game of Thrones, and anytime you tell anybody, their follow-up points like, no, I get it, like with the dragons and the sword fighting, but you gotta watch. This show's like ridiculous. There's like beheadings, and they drain people's blood upside down, and there's a lot of incest and stuff, and I'm like, yeah, man, I don't want to watch any of that. Aragon had none of it. I'm gonna shout out Aragon a third time just for good luck, and because who else is doing that? But the Queen of England, gangster. You know why? Because everyone thinks the crown isn't really doing anything anymore. They think that they're just like for show. They think that they're like this state-sponsored Kardashian family, which the idea has some merit. Maybe it limits the amount of celebrity-obsessed culture. Maybe the people who have been people for a lot longer maybe know what they're doing. I don't know. But like a real G, she moves in silence like lasagna. I'll explain. The Queen of England, I don't know if any of you really knew this, not anymore, and now it's the King, King Charles, but anyway, when she was alive, she was like the largest landowner in the world. Granted, that's where your argument, well, that's where all the colonizing and stuff happened, but I say that happened, now what? Now what happens next? If your argument is they got all this because they did that, my follow-up is, well, that's regardless, the morality doesn't matter. It already happened. We could debate the ethics of Hitler, but I would argue we're wasting time. He was wrong, I thought. However, you name something 600-pound Hitler, and 20,000 people listen. I thank each and every one of your mamas. The world is now the way the world is. There is only now, there is only what is. Not to get too philosophical. So, the dominoes have fallen. The world is divided. Most of Africa is demarcated into who fucking knows anymore. But again, we can only try and correct it moving forward. The point is, after all the British doing the colonizing and whatnot, now a lot of people seem to forget the consequences of that happened. We let all these other countries have their own other flags. We let Gandhi do his shit, test his self-will and determination by sharing a bed with underage girls. We let all of that happen. We let all these countries have their flags and independence, freedom. But somehow in the fine print, the British managed to slip in, all of this is grand, but we still own the land. Cheers, bruv. Genius. Mwah. Chef's kiss. Largest landowner. So that's not nothing immediately, right? We have to recognize their power is a tad bit more than symbolic when you own most of the places you can stand. So keeping that in mind, last year, The Guardian, of all people, which is a pretty reliable thing, right? I think that's one of the few places left where people objectively, even though it may have a slant, say there's some journalism happening. Last year, The Guardian ran an article that the headline read, Royals vetted more than 1,000 laws via Queen's consent. Think about that. Why would people in Parliament, in the British government, in the House of Lords, House of Commons, isn't it kind of like strange how so much of their government, despite having dumber, sillier words, kind of represents the American? That's a whole different rabbit hole. But some people think we're still the same country. I'm not going to get into it, and I don't think that either. Definitely don't Google that and waste a weekend. More than 1,000 laws since just 2021. Keep in mind the Queen just died in 2022, so that was a whole lot of questions brought to Her Majesty where she had to say, yes, no, fuck off, cheers. Now, another thing a lot of you probably don't know is that the crown, the Queen, it still just seems weird to say the king because, anyway, the Queen the British crown always had the ability to veto anything. They just never used it. It had been a very long time since they had done that. I'm talking maybe like William and Mary shit. I don't know. I'm not positive, but there is a college in Virginia named that. Look into the Virginia Company. It's still one country. That's not me. That was, an opinion I just want to put a spotlight on. I don't want to feel like I'm biased. To anyone thinks I display a bias towards anything, my only bias is to simply hopefully find the opposite of yours. That's truly my only slant when it comes to presenting an issue. Whatever your opinion is on it, I want to perturb it. I just want to poke it. And a lot of the best ways to poke people and to really just agitate them is to present real facts that are just true and kind of make you question the reality of how everything works. In this instance, the fact that, yes, the Queen and the Crown had the ability to veto laws this whole time, but they just didn't do it. It would be so unheard of in modern times that it would be a public outcry. It would be really weird. It'd be such a process to get it all done. It would be a shit show. But just in the period of a year, a calendar year before the lady literally died on the job, she was presented with 1,000 laws ranging from everything from economical concerns, how to handle schooling, roads, infrastructure, foreign security, national security, the military, every facet of life. Everyone in the British government last year had 1,000 laws that they had to vote on, yay or nay, in a powdered wig. But before that could happen, and this is what was interesting about the Guardian article, before the Queen had to, just hear all of these laws and say, you know what, I'll grant you the ability to talk about them. That's literally the order it was revealed the laws were presented to the Queen. Now, what I mean by that is before these laws could be presented properly on the court, on the floor, to be discussed amongst those dressed ridiculously in a wig, before those laws could be brought up to be discussed, negotiated, and tinkered with, and improved upon and compromised to reach a conclusion, before that process could happen, the very things, just the qualities, the components of the law have to be ran by the Queen first. So it's not like everyone in the House of Lords and House of Commons, they all proposed a bill, voted on it, and everyone agreed to it the way it works here in America, where that happens, in the legislative branch, and then it goes up to the executive. You get how that works? Or maybe you don't. I don't know. That was not what happened. The Queen, the Crown, had this power that was so unheard of for them to ever use ever again. But every single law, before it could even be brought up and discussed, just the basic fundamentals of it, and I'm talking 1,000 specifically different situations and potential laws, were all brought to the Queen for her to grant approval. For the very concept of these laws to even be talked about in government formally, you had to get the Queen's approval. Now, using your deductive thinking caps, I ask you, what does that imply to you? This power, this veto power that the Queen has that would never ever use again, because she's just a symbolic figurehead at this point. It's not like she was the largest landowner who had to literally approve, like Tony Soprano, just the words attached to a maybe law to be discussed formally. If you had a thought, you had to run it by her first. Is that not a gangster? Is that not a stone-cold chili pimp? Bitch, I want you to run your thoughts by me first. Don't you even have a public thought without addressing your majesty first? Why don't you sit down, have a cup of tea, and explain to me why the fuck you think you're gonna do that? I would like to imagine that's how most sit-downs with the Queen went down, because that would just be incredible. Unfortunately, probably not, because that woman proved to be very polite, even in the face of ridiculous lunacy. When Meghan Markle claimed that, oh my God, they're so racist over here. Bitch, they were not racist. If they were really racist, do you really think you'd be married to the former prince? Because, he didn't seem to have a title on the website. Do you really think they were that racist? Come on, be reasonable. That almost sounds like I didn't even think there would be black people in the UK. That sounds like that type of uninformed ridiculous. You didn't know. And granted, to extend a white man's olive branch, if you will, to Meghan, might find the culture over there to be particularly stuffy, to be particularly unkind to the hip-hop. Not that Meghan was pulling up bumping Jay-Z, and I think I'm only, in my defense of her, getting more and more racist. I don't mean to, and I will walk back slowly from this ledge from which I've found myself. But Meghan running her fucking mouth all the time, she's talking all this shit. When the Queen literally met with Meghan to say, listen, I know everyone thinks we are all in support of incest. And granted, we might be reptilian space lizards who do that sometimes. Pay no attention to how little foreheads between both of my eyes. But unfortunately, woman, we have some rules here. Now, you may love my redheaded son who, for publicity's sake, served in Afghanistan for a day. I get his appeal. He's a bit of a fuck up, but he is charming and probably he's a good boy at heart. And, that red hair, I get it. Boy, do redheaded men feel underrated. I get all of that. But you must understand, dear, if you're marrying a prince, you would then be a princess and then somehow related to the throne. And if, God forbid, all of us stand on a plane or something stupid and all disappear, all hell breaks loose, and that retarded ginger is somehow the king, we have a problem for you because you weren't born here. Now, you can't tell me you would have a problem with that because we have a similar rule in America where you can't be president unless you were born in America. I'm not giving you a judgment call on whether that's right or wrong, but that's the rule. Not a lot of people are even arguing it. So that's fucking Megan, shut up on one point. And then, so technically, much like, the power that the queen had to veto any law that anyone maybe even thought of over there, she had the power to simply legally veto the ginger's marriage. But she didn't. You know what she did? She said, I'm a woman who's very wise. I have great instinct. And I think I'm going to grant an exception. You know why? Because it is truly ridiculous and absurd. It would almost be like thinking our family would be implicated in a scandal with Epstein. So in that same completely nonsensical vein that is not based in reality at all, it's very unlikely that Harry would ever become king. So I'll grant an exception because I can tell you love the boy. And what I'd like to imagine is that she was in some sense like the Oracle in the Matrix in some way. And then you know what Megan did with that courtesy? She fucked off to Santa Barbara, Montecito to be exact, and has a podcast where she continues to bitch about the experience of being denied a princess from a palace in Montecito. Granted, it's in the United States, but could that place sound any more like where a castle should be? Ingrate. No manners, not proper. Another example of an American not really being able to recognize there are some reasons to fucking, straighten up your back for a second. Be respectful. Because this lady owns most of the land on Earth and you have to run thoughts by her. She's a gangster. Don't tell me she wasn't. And I know I'm kind of the conspiracy guy. I'm actually not at all. I'm very mainstream. Everything that you hear on mainstream news is what I say. And any other outside opinion that I give you is the opinion I've heard from someone else, not mine. I just want to confuse you. I want to make sure none of this makes sense. Hopefully that's the case. But the queen is powerful. And it does kind of lend some credence to the idea, and I don't know how many of you have explored this concept, but there are some, tinfoil hat people out there who think America is still kind of one country with the United Kingdom. There's a lot of people that think we're kind of just still the same country. There was a lot of song and dance and pageantry to just let a lot of people think, much like the rest of the world where they got their own flags. We said, yeah, sure, Gandhi, whatever, Africa, you can have this, you can have that. But we still don't own the land. We still own all the land. So that's one interesting point. And then there's that weird legal point you hear crazy people say that the bar here in America is the same bar in England, which then kind of makes it like you're a lawyer by de facto for the crown of England in some way, which was kind of the case with a lot of America's founding fathers. Interesting. And then you could just look at all the basic similarities just in terms of the optics of it, and House of Lords, House of Commons. We have the House of State Representatives. We have the Senate. There's a yin and a yang. There seems to be an equal and opposite reciprocal. The only thing that seems to be different, which is, I don't know, and I'm just walking out an idea that isn't mine. The only thing that seems to be different is here in America, if you have an idea, if you have a law that you think might be a good idea, and you're an elected official, you're someone whose job it is to think of those things and present them, you present them to your peers, to your other fellow elected officials. You discuss and negotiate and blah, 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 and some House Majority Whip pushes some journalist in front of a train. And then eventually compromise happens because that's how we do it in America. And then that law is then passed up, the legislative branch, and then it arrives on the president's desk. The president reads the fully formed, fully compromised, I guess that's kind of the right word. The bill that is now done. Both sides have fought bitterly to the end to reach a conclusion. This is what we give you. We really just need you to sign here and we'll keep it moving because, Mr. President, we understand you're dead. Literally. Should I call somebody? Anyway, the difference with that system in the United Kingdom is, courtesy of The Guardian now, we now have proof that those crazy dudes with the tinfoil hat who think we're all still serving the crown in some weird way and these people might be space lizards and pay no attention to the fact that NASA just hired a bunch of theologians to all meet at Princeton and talk about how does the public handle if we tell everyone there's aliens. Pay no attention to the fact that Boeing has a secret space plane that has returned for its 6th mission. It's essentially a fighter jet, a Top Gun plane that can also fly without a person in it, that has made 6 trips deep into space with a payload that has been estimated to be the size of a flatbed pickup truck that is highly confidential, courtesy of the Air Force. Oh, by the way, there's been a lot of reported UFOs in the Ukraine. Why does it seem to be they always show up whenever there's a threat of nuclear war, which we have people in Russia very high up saying, boy, is that going to happen. So all of the crazy people who talked about all of that nonsense potentially and said that the United States is essentially still serving under the crown of the alien space lizards, they're coming, they're here, look at the evidence elsewhere, at Boeing, at every level of government, blah, 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 blah. I'm insane. What I'm saying is the system of law here in America, where everyone votes and passes a law and the president just signs and keeps it moving, the difference across the pond with the people who may or may not be the alien space lizards, they have to run their thoughts by the queen still. Symbolic my butt cheeks. You have an idea that you think you want to present to the floor. You have an idea that might make Britain better. You have a bright idea. Oh, you want to stand out. You have a great idea that will make life here in England better for all of us. You think you're better than me. You want to present this as a law, maybe? You have a thought. Isn't that cute? Ask the queen if you're allowed to have it. Now, for all of the similarities, it's weird, and it does certainly point to, well, if the only difference between the American system of government and the British system of government is the fact that we have the elected large groups which kind of ensure a certain level of red tape and just non-efficiency, which in a sense kind of safeguards from radical swings one way or the other, makes sense because the deviation in relation to how the British system of government works stops at the crucial point that you can't present a goddamn thought on the floor in a powdered wig unless you've consulted with the Queen first. 1,000 laws. From 2021 up until she died this year, she approved you to think about and then go elsewhere, go on, fuck off with it, and go talk about it in your fancy clothes. Largest landowner in the world. Symbolic? I don't know. I don't think so. And again, if you're going to say she was a colonizer, if you're going to say she was the head of a fascist regime, I don't really think so, because Britain largely shaped the way the world is. Again, I ask you, listening to the podcast with probably wireless headphones on currently or driving in a car that's yours. And if you're a woman listening to this podcast driving in a car, you're double lucky, and I don't take money from Saudi Arabia. I'm not Jared Kushner. Or Russia, because now there's a partnership there. Fuck us. If you're listening to this podcast, if you understand that your place in the world is not literally outside at all times with wondering where your food's coming from, life is not terrible. And you, in one way or another, kind of have Britain to thank for that. Maybe the way they got to it was a little unfair sometimes, but look at any country's history. We were a little harsh to Native Americans here. I grant you that, but we've changed the name of a football team and gave them casinos. What the fuck else do you want from us? We can't be in penance the rest of our lives. So, the Queen, kind of made the world pretty good for most people. Anyone tweeting about how much she sucked has almost, in a sense, her to thank for the ability to tweet it. And this alien thing, we may have uncovered something here. We may have hinted at a larger truth. All I'm saying is that I have absolutely no idea what I'm talking about at all, but you should look into it. God save the Queen. Long live the king, and build back better.